Welcome. Thank you for braving the stormy night. And I know it's a really busy time of year, so I appreciate your taking the time out and gifting yourself with a little time of silence and quiet and a chance to kind of settle in and tap into the stillness. Get away from the busyness of the season and have a little quiet time to go within. Anyway, I'm happy to see those of you that could make it. And is anybody, are you a new person? No, okay, I'm so sorry if I don't recognize everybody's faces. And you've been here before, right? Yeah. Okay, so the rest of you I do recognize, so I'm happy to have you here. So we're going to start by taking 3 deep breaths, and on the exhale we're going to sigh. So it's going to sound something like so we're going to do that 3 times together. So if you're willing, join me. Inhale. Exhale with a sigh. And let your shoulders go down as you exhale, just to release some of that tension. Okay, again, inhale. One more time. Inhale. Okay, so there's a couple of reasons for doing that. One is that I think it sort of grounds us and centers us. But the other reason is that we're saying goodbye to Scorpio, and I'm so glad that last month is over with. It's just like, whenever Sagittarius comes around, I always breathe a sigh of relief, and I just feel like, okay, we made it through another Scorpio month. Those of you that were here last time or who know a little bit about Scorpio know that it's a pretty intense energy. And one of the challenges for that month is for us to be willing to go inside and face whatever darkness that we might find there and do what we can to transform it. So it's a journey, and you know, I always used to think that transformation would take such a long time, like, you know, a lot of therapy and a lot of going inside and a lot of struggle. But I was at a workshop a while ago with a sound healer named Tom Kenyon. Maybe some of you are familiar with him. And he said, you know, transformation is really all about just acknowledging what's there, bringing it up to the surface and seeing it and just saying, oh, there's that again. You know, oh, there's that old feeling of not feeling like I'm enough or not doing enough, or and just recognizing it, and that in itself is a transformative experience. So it's not that we always have to, you know, be really intense about it and have all this struggle. Sometimes we might have to, but it's nice to remember that we can go through that Scorpio month just being willing to acknowledge what's there, or asking for whatever is there that we may not be conscious of to come to the surface so we can acknowledge it. So anyway, we come out of the underground and the underworld in Scorpio, and we emerge into this wonderful Sagittarian energy, which is fiery and full of hope and optimism and the larger vision for what is possible. And so it always feels like sort of a breath of fresh air, you know, after that intensity of Scorpio. Sagittarius loves the larger picture. Not so much the details, but what's really going on in the larger scheme of things. And it's that perception and that vision that allows the Sagittarian to see possibilities. And so Sagittarius is very much a sign of the visionary, the one who can really see what's possible and go for it. One of the symbols for Sagittarius is the archer. And the archer pulls back his bow and he aims it straight and he lets it loose and it goes right to the goal. And in fact, the mantra for Sagittarius is, I see the goal, I reach the goal, and then I see another. Sagittarians are on a quest for the truth. And they won't stop with just one goal. They're single-mindedly pointed toward that goal. And then when that's reached, they go on to the next one. So it's very dedicated determination that you find in Sagittarius. But there's also that moment of holding the arrow back and that tautness and that sort of quivering feeling that happens before you actually let it loose. And so I happened to come across a poem that my astrology teacher wrote about Sagittarius, and it's called The Quivering. Excuse me. And her name is Heidi Robbins. If we but make friends with the quivering, the subtle and not so subtle shaking of the body and all its parts, letting go of what we have held on to long enough. If we but soften our grasp on who we have always been, to make room for what can be, knowing not what may appear, knowing only the quivering. And I ask, is not some part of us always dying? And I ask, are we not every day, in some small way, reborn? Then, just as the wild animal shakes off the fear of attack, we too can shake off the fears that want to eat us whole. We can walk barefoot in the woods with a quiver of arrows, cautious of what still wants to ensnare us, but alive with the light emanating from our newly trodden path. All right, here we go. Are we not path makers? So we are. Are we not pathfinders? So we are. Do arrows not quiver before they are loosed into the world? Then so must we. Finally, we are archer and arrow at once, sprung into the wind, carried swiftly, silently, precisely to our very heart, pierced and present. I love that. I love that word, quivering. I mean, it just, can't you feel it in your body? I've had a lot of experiences of quivering in my life. I know what that feels like. Okay. So some descriptive words for the Sagittarian are one-pointedness, as we mentioned before. Sagittarians are often explorers. They're adventurous. They've got that fiery, passionate energy. They want to see the world. They're philosophers because they seek the truth. They're moralists. They have a very strong sense of moral integrity. They can often get stuck in their morality. I have a Sagittarian son. He would die if you know I'm talking about him, but he'll never watch YouTube. And he took a very moralistic stand in high school to never drink. And I thought, great, I think that's awesome. But then he became so judgmental about everybody else who drank. You know, he couldn't resist kind of denigrating all his friends who were drinking. So the Sagittarian are very idealistic and moralistic. They have a high standard for themselves and for everyone else, but they have to be careful not to be judgmental while they take that stance of high integrity. They're free spirits. They're often guides because they make good teachers. But they can also be the know-it-all. They don't like to be told that they don't know something. So the opposite sign is Gemini, and Gemini is a very, very different energy, where Sagittarius is so single-minded and purposeful and driven and determined and dedicated. Gemini is just sort of all over the place and just here and there and everywhere and loves everything and wants to explore everything, is curious about everything, wants to learn everything, wants to dispense what they know to everybody around them. And so, they're very mentally agile because they're an air sign. So it's all about, they seek the truth too, but they seek it so in order to be able to tell it to everybody else. That's the personality of the Gemini. So the Sagittarius needs the Gemini energy to give it a little flexibility so it doesn't become rigid. And the Gemini could use a dose of Sagittarian energy to focus and get grounded and set his eye on a goal and go for it, rather than spending all its time exploring and gathering information. So they're very good partners if they can work together. But they're different elements. Sagittarius is fire, Gemini is air. So you can never have two opposite signs in the same element. So in other words, you couldn't have Sagittarius fire and Gemini fire. They're always different elements because, again, they need to be balanced and integrated. So what do you get when you mix fire with air? Well, you get a very fiery mental body. Your mind is on fire with ideas, and because of all that passionate, energetic Sagittarian energy, when it hits the mental realm, it can be destructive if you're not careful, because the mind is sort of alive with everything. And it was said actually in the ancient mystery schools that Sagittarius was also called the sign of silence, because of the destructive capacity of that fiery mental energy and how it could be used in such a destructive way. So the practice in those mystery schools was, the discipline was silence, to maintain silence during this time because of the potential for harm. So the keynote became harmlessness in thought, word, and deed. So that's a good mantra to remind us this month as we go through this month, is that we want to be aware of being harmless in our thoughts and our words and in our actions. So how do we do that in this busy holiday season? How do we maintain that silence? I'm sure that it's not meant to mean that we go around not talking, but there is an inner silence that we can cultivate that's always there. There's a point of stillness within us if we just slow down and give ourselves some time to be quiet and go inside and look for that place of stillness. And then can we carry that inner silence, that quiet repose sort of, out into our everyday life? I think that's our practice this month. If you just imagine for a moment what your days would be like if you could carry that inner stillness with you everywhere you went. I mean, wouldn't you find yourself responding in a different way? I mean, how do we quiet that mental energy of Gemini that's so on fire this month? Well, I don't think we can, I'll make this statement, I don't think we can control our thoughts in terms of what comes into our minds. We can't control what comes into our minds. But if we practice awareness and mindfulness, we can become aware of when those thoughts are becoming obsessive, or we're in a negative loop where we're beating ourselves up about something, or maybe we just kind of space out into this ethereal realm where we just are kind of floating out there and we're not grounded in reality. So with mindfulness, you can notice when that's happening, and then you can choose what kind of thought you want to have. So I think it's about not identifying always with our thoughts. You know, that bumper sticker that says, "Don't believe everything you think." I think that's really true. I think that's really true. If you pause long enough to become aware of what you're thinking, and you realize that it's not supporting you, or it's not enlivening you, or it's not constructive, then you can choose to think something else, you know? And because this is a visionary month, I would invite you to envision, in those moments when you're wanting to change your thinking, envision our world, our planet, healed, at peace, with brotherhood and sisterhood happening everywhere. I mean, what a great vision to hold for our world right now with all the turmoil going on, right? So that's your challenge for this month, one of them. I was doing research on this, and I came across this quote that said, negative thoughts can have karmic consequences. And I thought, oh boy, that's kind of scary. I mean, that's really good motivation for us to get sort of control of our thinking. But to think that, and I don't think it means like just because some thought comes into our mind like, oh, I really don't like that person, that we're going to have karmic consequences. But if we feed that thought and focus on it and become real identified with it, then that energy goes out there and has an impact. And so it'll come back to us in some way, in some lifetime. So meditation is a really good practice to use to help get control of your thinking, because it keeps you sort of in the present moment, and it teaches you how to kind of take a step back and look at your thoughts as clouds passing through the sky, and that way you don't become the cloud, you just become the space that's watching the cloud. So if that's an issue for you in terms of your thinking, you might try that meditation practice. So it takes discernment to notice what thoughts are illuminating and true, and which thoughts are just our ego playing with us. But we always have choice. Once we become aware, we can always choose where we want our thinking to go. So how do we silence our words this month? Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable some people are in silence when you're having a conversation or when you're in a group of people? I'm kind of an introvert, so I really enjoy the silence, and I don't mind the pauses because it gives me time to think. But a lot of people can't stand having just a quiet space when people are sharing something. They have to, you know, they're either thinking about what they're going to say next, or they just don't create the space for anybody else to talk. I think I think sometimes I've noticed that there are people who sort of get an adrenaline high from sharing bad news or dramatic events, like, wow, did you hear the news today? Do you know what happened today? I mean, it's just sort of like they get off on it, you know? And so how do we quiet that down? How do we keep ourselves from feeling like we have to jump in there and say something? I think it becomes a practice of listening more. Can we just be comfortable with listening more? And can we listen to understand instead of listening to make our point, or listening so that we can say what we want to say next, or so that we can be right about something? It's a whole different experience if you actually sit down with someone, especially somebody who has a totally different viewpoint than you have, and you just go into the conversation with the intention to understand where they're coming from. You don't have to agree with it, you don't have to support it, but just the energy of understanding it will change the whole dynamic. So I think that's one thing we can do, is to listen more this Christmas season. We can ask ourselves, is it really important to share? And will it be harmful to anyone, like the gossip, you know? Is this going to hurt anyone? We might ask ourselves, what's our motive in sharing? You know, there's a wonderful practice that the Tibetan master Dwal Kul talks about in his books about a nightly review, where every night before you go to sleep, you just run through in your mind the events of the day, the conversations you had, the people you met, the places that you went, and think about what was your motive in talking to that person? What was your motive in taking that action? What was behind that? I mean, it's really humbling, I'll tell you. It's a humbling experience to realize that our motives are often not very altruistic. So that's another practice that we can be aware of this month. I think if we take the time, again, in conversations or in interactions with people, to just step back and observe and get clear, then right action will automatically emerge. It's when we are reactive and we go into old repetitive habits of responding that were sometimes not so helpful. It's sometimes not so helpful. So again, we have choice. How much activity do you want to bring into your life is a good question. Because you're the one in charge. You get to decide how busy do you want to be this season? Can you say no? Can you take some time to get clear about what's the most meaningful thing to you about this season, and can you do more of that than just get caught up in the buying the best present for Aunt Mary? So let's talk for a minute about the fiery, passionate, visionary energy of Sagittarius and how we can bring it into our everyday life. We've talked a little bit about it, but I think if we can invoke the single-mindedness of Sagittarius and we can commit to holding in our thoughts a vision of possibility for our planet, that we can really be a healing force for the world. You know, it's hard to believe that one person's energy can have that big an impact, but I have come to really believe that every single person and their energy field can impact the world. I had a friend who's a musician tell me, put it this way, every time you speak, a vibration goes out into the universe and it changes everything, because it goes out as a vibration and everything it touches is changed. So think about what kind of vibration you want to put out into the world. And I think holding that vision in our imaginations of the kind of world that we want can put that out into the world then as a vibration, and it can change things. And the more people that do that, the greater the impact. So that might be a good practice for us this month as well. We could energetically and passionately direct our emotions to expanding our hearts and letting in more love and dispelling the fears that might be there. We could strengthen our belief that there's something larger working itself out in our world. A new world is being born, and we have to trust that all this chaos that we're experiencing now is just a prelude to that new world that's being born, because it's a spiritual law that chaos always precedes expansion. And that happens in our own lives too. You know, we go through those really dark times, and sometimes it just opens us up and we have this whole new life before we know it that we never could have dreamed of. And we always have so much help. You know, we have a whole cadre of masters and great ones and beings on the other side that are always helping us and always available to us. But we have to ask. That's another spiritual law. It's called the law of invocation and evocation. We are promised that if we ask, if we invoke, that requires a response. It may not be the response we want, it may not be in the time that we would like it to happen, but that is a spiritual law. But we do have to ask, because the masters are sort of the overseers of our planetary evolution, and they are in charge of sending out forces and energies onto the planet, but they cannot control what we do. They're not allowed to. This is a free will planet. So it's up to us to do that, but we can ask them for help, and they can help in the way that they can, but we have to ask. So it never hurts to pray, or however you want to ask. So what we see in the world today are the forces of darkness, which just means that there's a consciousness of materialism that's really prevalent in the world. There are those who are fighting against any movement forward, any sort of evolutionary step into the future. They're just digging in their heels and saying, no, we don't want to do that. So how do we deal with that? I think the only way we deal with that is by invoking the light. And invoking it onto the planet, but also invoking it into our own hearts. Expanding our own capacity to hold the light and to radiate it outward. And so Christmas time is a perfect time to do that, because there's lights everywhere. So if you just look at those lights and think, oh, I'm going to just put that right in my heart and let it shine there. You know, the esoteric explanation for the Christmas season is that it's the birth of the Christ consciousness within your heart. That's the meaning of the birth of Christ, is that it's the birth of the love, unconditional love within your heart, called the Christ consciousness. So we can cultivate that this season, and I think that's the deepest meaning of the Christian holiday, is that we can all invoke that light into our world, but also into our own hearts. And the more light we hold, the more we can radiate outward into the world. Okay, let's just settle into our bodies. Feel the vibration from the music and the drum. Just establishing a nice steady rhythm to your breathing. And breathe a silent Om into your physical body, releasing all tension and strain. And breathe the silent Om into the emotional body, quieting it down, becoming still. And finally breathing a silent Om into the mental body, asking that Gemini energy to just take a rest. And now imagining the soul star above your head as a radiant ball of light. And opening your crown chakra, allow the light of the soul to pour down the center of your body, connecting each chakra, filling each chakra with the light of the soul, and going down into the center of the earth. Feel that light just fill your body. And then from the center of the earth, breathe in that earth energy, grounded and centered. Breathe it into your heart. And now on the inhalation, breathe in the energy from the earth and bring it up to meet the energy of the soul above your head. So on the inhalation, breathe up from the earth up to the soul star above your head. And on the exhalation, allow that light to travel down your spine back into the earth. So do that for 1 or 2 breaths. Upward to the soul star, downward to the earth. And feel the alignment that takes place as you are joining heaven and earth within your own body. And now put your attention gently on your heart center. And breathe into your heart center, the symbol for Sagittarius, the arrow pointing at its goal. And now breathing in the energy of Sagittarius, that fiery, passionate, idealistic, visionary energy resting in your heart. Feel it enliven your whole body. And state your intention inwardly to be harmless in thought, word, and deed during this month of Sagittarius. To use that energy for its highest possible expression. And now let us send our energy up into the home of the great ones, the masters. Ask to be connected to the spiritual realms where they reside. Ask to be connected to them. We have been told that the head of the hierarchy of masters, called the Christ, has promised that whatsoever we ask in his name shall be accomplished. So let us ask for the forces of light to descend on our planet. See in your mind's eye this energy descend and flood our planet with light. Imagine this energy magnetizing the will to good within the hearts of people everywhere. Let us ask the great ones to impress upon the leaders of our country those great ideals and ideas that are based on a worldview of inclusivity and cooperation. Let the vision of brotherhood and sisterhood be realized. Let us hold a vision of a world at peace, of a world where resources are shared and where we recognize the divinity within everyone. Let us call forth the forces of light to create a great unifying, protective, and defending wall of light around our planet, magnifying the good and dispelling all negativity and evil from within and without. Finally, let us visualize the Christ, the head of the hierarchy of masters, in the center of our planet, radiating forth love, compassion, and blessing on all the world. Let us work in this way, aligning ourselves with the forces supporting the evolution of humanity. Let us work without fear. Let us remember that this is why we chose to incarnate at this time, to be beacons of light to our world as it goes through this transition into a new age. Send your gratitude and thanks now to the masters, to the hierarchy, to the Christ, to the forces of light. And we will close with this great invocation. Let the forces of light bring illumination to humankind. Let the spirit of peace be spread abroad. May people of goodwill everywhere meet in a spirit of cooperation. May forgiveness on the part of every human be the keynote at this time. Let power attend the effort of the great ones. So let it be, and help us to do our part. And so it is.